Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. My name is Sophia, I'm your host. The aim of Let the Quran Speak is to help you gain deeper insights into Muslims and Islam, as it is practiced here and in other parts of the world. In this episode, the Crucifixion of Jesus. Easter commemorates the crucifixion of Jesus and his resurrection from the dead. But what do Muslims believe happened to Jesus? Was he crucified? Will he return before the end of time? With me to discuss this topic is Dr. Shabir Ali, President of the Islamic Information Center. Dr. Shabir, it seems like Muslims have a very unorthodox understanding of what happened to Jesus.
Well, at least a very different understanding, somewhat different, we can say. There is an intersection of ideas at certain points, and then a diversion also.
It hinges on a particular verse in the Quran, right?
Yes, in fact, there are a few verses that touch upon this issue. There's a verse in Surah Al Imran, the third chapter of the Quran, where it says that God said to Jesus, "Inni mutawaffika wa rafi'uka ilay." I am going to. Now, I can't venture a translation without some interpretation here, but I'll do so anyhow. I'm going to take you and raise you to myself.
Okay.
Now, the verb that I've translated here as take might also mean I'm going to cause you to die. So there is some ambiguity here.
So take your life or something.
Yes,
like this.
whether some of the commentators said that this means that God is going to take Jesus in sleep. So his soul taken while he's asleep, or maybe his body and soul taken while he's in a state of sleep. Some others said no, God caused him to die for a few hours. Some said 3 hours, some said 7 hours, some said even 3 days, which almost parallels the gospel accounts, as if Jesus had been dead for a few days and then God somehow raised him to himself. Another passage in the same vein is in the 5th chapter of the Quran, where it says that Jesus will address God saying, فَلَمَّا تَوَفَّيْتَنِي كُنْتَ أَنْتَ الرَّقِيبَ عَلَيْهِمْ. After you had taken me, you remained as the watcher over my disciples. You, God, remained to watch over my disciples. So here is the idea that God took Jesus. But then what is meant by take? Again, the same sort of discussion follows, that it could be take in sleep or take in death. The verse, though, that you might be thinking of when you said that there is a verse is the one in Surah An-Nisa, the 4th chapter of the Quran, where it says that they said we killed Jesus, the Messiah, the messenger of God. And then the Quran follows up by saying, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ, whereas they killed him not, nor did they crucify him, but so it was made to appear to them.
This is a common verse that many Muslims quote.
Yes, and based on this verse, Muslims will commonly say that Jesus was not crucified, and by that they would mean that Jesus was not even put on the cross. So what are we to make of this whole gospel account that somebody was there on the cross and crucified under Roman authority, and that person was Jesus? Well, the Muslim commentators on the Quran generally say, with reference to this verse, that what actually happened was that Jesus was taken up alive into heaven before he was even arrested. And that's generally how the story is told. And someone else was made to look like Jesus, and this someone else was put on the cross.
Okay.
And so everyone was convinced that Jesus was on the cross, whereas in fact by this time Jesus was in heaven.
So who holds this point of view?
This is generally held by Muslims at large, because it is described like this in the Muslim commentaries on the Quran. However, that commentary on this verse is a spin-off from an attempt to take the verse in its most literal sense possible. You see, when it's crucifixion, both in English and in Arabic, is slightly ambiguous in that it can be used in two senses. One sense is that a person is actually executed by the method of crucifixion, which means he's actually put to death. But crucifixion can also mean merely hanging a person on the cross. Obviously with the intention of executing him, but not necessarily following through with it to the end.
But in most cases, wouldn't that be the natural sort of progression, that someone would die?
Yes,
Okay.
that would normally be the situation. But let's say it's discussed in Islamic texts what might be done with a certain category of criminals. And then the discussion follows, what if the person is put on the cross and then taken down after a while? Well, if he's put on the cross and taken down after a while, well, then he was still, in a sense, crucified. But in another sense, he wasn't crucified. So when the Quran is denying the crucifixion of Jesus, is it denying that Jesus was ever put on the cross at all? Or is it denying that Jesus was killed by this method? And to me, the most natural reading of the Quran in the light of what we know from the Gospels is that the Quran is denying that Jesus actually died on the cross. Now, if one were to study the Gospels carefully, one will see that there are points at which it is presumed that Jesus died, but no one had actually checked to see whether he died in the way in which one might expect a medical examiner to check. For example, listening for a heartbeat or checking the pulse of the person, even given the standards at the time. You see, Jesus was placed on a cross, which is by definition would place the victim above ground. So that in depictions of this in the Passion of the Christ, for example, you have Mary approaching Jesus, and Jesus is all the way up there, so that Mary's mouth is at the level with Jesus's toes. So what that means is that if you have a victim on the cross and he's several feet above ground, then if he appears to breathe his last, you cannot tell the difference between whether he is in a state of death or in a state of coma, for example. So when the reporters said that Jesus died, they just simply mean that, for all we can tell, he's expired and that's the end of him. And of course, if you take that crucified victim down from the cross and you put him in a grave and cover him with 6 feet of earth, then he will die.
So based on this understanding, then, what do you think happened to Jesus then?
Well,
if we follow your line of logic.
One cannot say for absolutely sure what happened to Jesus, because this is a historical question. But as a theological matter, trying to interpret the Quran, I would say that when the Quran says that they did not crucify Jesus, it simply means that they did not succeed in their plan of killing Jesus by this method of execution. They thought they had finished the job, but in fact they had not. And so when the Gospel of Luke reports that the scholars who wanted to see Jesus dead, they left to observe the Sabbath towards the Friday evening when Jesus was crucified. And then Matthew's Gospel says that on the Saturday, they came to Pilate's court, asking Pilate to seal up the tomb in which Jesus' body was placed, because they were afraid that his disciples will come and steal his body and then tell everyone that he was resurrected from the dead. And so it is said now that Pilate did give the order to have the tomb sealed. But when the soldiers went to seal the tomb, it is not mentioned that they actually looked inside to see if the body was still there. And so there is some ambiguity and some questions which are left unanswered by the sequence of events. The Gospels do narrate that on the Sunday, Jesus began to appear alive to his disciples. But Raymond Brown, in his introduction to New Testament Christology, has shown that all of these are various accounts which are found in the multiple Gospels, but depicting a central event. And that central event in which Jesus appeared to his disciples need not have been a physical flesh and blood appearance. It could have been a spiritual type of appearance. And this coincides with something that is mentioned in Tafsir al-Jalalain, that God had actually granted the disciples of Jesus a vision of Jesus so that they could be satisfied that despite everything that they had observed, Jesus is in the end alive with God. And that would have been a source of solace and comfort to them.
Mm-hmm. So Muslims also believe that Jesus will return at some point.
Yes, the Quranic verse that you asked about in Surah 4, the 157th verse, is followed up by verse number 158 and 59. Verse number 158 says that God raised him to himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then 159 says, وَإِن مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا لَيُؤْمِنَنَّ بِهِ قَبْلَ مَوْتِهِ. And there is no person of the book except that will believe in him prior to his death. Some commentators say that his death here refers to Jesus' death.
Mm-hmm.
And they say that this means that before the end of time, Jesus will return.
Physically.
Okay. And when he does, at that time, he will finally die. And so before he finally dies, meaning on his second advent, those who are now disbelieving in him will actually believe in him. And those who do believe in him but in the wrong way will believe in him at that time in the correct way. But some other commentators say that this does not necessarily refer to Jesus' second advent. It's referring to the person of the book himself or herself. When such a person is about to die, such a person will have the correct faith in Jesus. And so they're being warned by this verse. You had better believe in the right way now, because a time will come when eventually, like it or not, you are going to see the reality and believe in Jesus as he should be believed in. So you may as well believe in him even now.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Brother Shabir.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we return, the Muslim creation story.